Tom Hucker. I represent District 5 here in the Montgomery County Council. I'm the Vice President of the County Council this year. As Dave and I were thinking about how to celebrate Dr. King's legacy this weekend, obviously he spent his entire life focused on something that we've been working on in Montgomery County officially at the county council level all year, racial equity and social justice, but particularly in voting rights. And it's been 54 years since he launched the campaign to pass the National Voting Rights Act of 1965. But as it mentioned in the film, in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down the core of the act and allowed 9 states to change their election laws without advance federal approval. We know we have so much more work to do to fight for the ideals that Dr. King espoused. The fact is we can't have a healthy democracy if we have barriers to the ballot box. We have to continue to fight together to achieve a future where all Americans can freely exercise their fundamental right to vote. And I'm very grateful that you've joined us today for this program, and very grateful to all our panelists for being here. Our panelists are 3 people I have incredible respect for, and I'm going to stop here and ask them each to introduce themselves.
So good, well, I guess it's afternoon, so good afternoon, everyone. And apologies, I'm just getting over a flu, so please let me know if you can't hear me. My name is Joanne Antoine. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland, and also a resident of Montgomery County. I live here in District 20. For those who aren't familiar with Common Cause, we are a nonpartisan watchdog organization that has been working here in the state for about 45 years now, really working to ensure that our government is working on behalf of the public's best interest, and that you all are able to have your voices heard in the political process. So we work on a wide, we work on a wide range of issues ranging from ethics and transparency to redistricting and campaign finance reform, and obviously voting rights efforts, which is a large part of the work that we're doing, especially this session.
Good morning. My name is Laurie-Anne Sayles, council member from the city of Gaithersburg. We're one of the fastest growing cities in the state of Maryland, the most diverse in the United States. And so I look forward to continuing this discussion with you and look forward to answering your questions. Thank you for having me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Will Smith. I'm the state senator for District 20, which is Silver Spring and Tacoma Park. I am the new chairman of the Judicial Proceedings Committee in Annapolis, which is one of 4 standing committees on the Senate side. So, we'll talk a little bit more about what comes under our purview and some of the hot topics that are likely to come up with respect to voting and criminal justice and the intersection between the two a little later. But I'm really excited to be on this panel today. I want to say thank you, Tom, for hosting and facilitating this and drawing more attention and really being a leader on this, especially in White Oak. And then also our good friend Daniel Croma in the front row here. I was gone for a long time, and I get snippets of what was going on, and I just can't believe the level of activism and engagement that you two, together in particular, have put forward to make sure that this is top of mind for all of us. I just want to say thank you for your advocacy and work.
Thank you, Will. Well, we're all very lucky to have this esteemed panel, and I have some questions for them, and then we want to take some questions from all of you. We have about an hour. But I want to begin by just making sure everybody's up to speed on the voter suppression that we've experienced right here in Montgomery County, which is incredible. Not just Georgia, not just those other 40 states, but right here in Montgomery County. In 2018, on Election Day, several polling sites in East County, all in my district, in District 5, but also others in other places in the county, faced waiting times as long as 2 hours to vote. Voters are standing in line up to 2 hours to vote. My staff and I went to sites like the Praisner site in Burtonsville to demand that the Board of Elections pay attention and try to encourage voters to stay in line. As soon as I got that day to the Maryland Praisner Center in Burtonsville, I called David Naiman at the Board of Elections and told him what was happening, and he inveighed upon the staff of the Board of Elections to try to send over some additional machines, because some of the machines had broken, they have 4 years to get ready for this, right? But we have machines that have broken early on Election Day, and David helped send some machines over in a truck to replace them. But of course, that takes hours to do. We also called the media and tried to get the media to focus on this to add pressure to the Board of Elections to address the situation. And we walked up and down the line talking to people and encouraging them to stay in line. Talked to a lot of people who, by the end of the day, many people, of course, no surprise, had to leave to pick up their kids from childcare, had to leave to pick up parents that they were caring for, had to leave to pick up kids from school, and many elderly people and others who just couldn't stand for 2 hours and needed to leave. There were some volunteers that showed up with pizza and water bottles to encourage people to stay in line and get their votes counted. This year, with the support of the county council, we got support from all 9 on the county council and the county executive and the entire state delegation. We've been pushing back to encourage the county board of elections to add the early voting center in White Oak. In White Oak, where Daniel, I mentioned earlier, lives, and it's a largely African-American community full of immigrants from all over the world, and a community where an awful lot of people don't have cars. Around 40% of folks in East County don't have cars and are dependent on our public transportation. And if you don't have an early voting center right in White Oak in the rec center there, it's 45 minutes on a bus up to Burtonsville and back. So not many of us are going to do that to vote. But many working people, as was covered in the movie, don't have the opportunity to do that when you're taking time off work or when you're caring for your kids, and that costs you real money. A new site there would create a lot more access to voting for immigrants, and especially for voters that don't have that access to transportation. Unfortunately, the County Board of Elections refused our request. The State Board of Elections upheld that decision, and now Will's going to get a chance to talk about it. Senator Smith's agreed to put in legislation introduced in the General Assembly to force them to put an early voting center in White Oak. So please thank him for his leadership on that. Also, right here in Montgomery County, we've had to fight deliberate policy decisions for some time aimed at suppressing voters. In 2015, when I had just started on the council, the County Board of Elections decided to move the highly successful early voting site from Burtonsville, which was the most successful one for where African Americans in Montgomery County vote. They decided to move it to Brookville, outside Olney, very far away and off transit. It was naked voter suppression. They admitted at the time, they said their goal was to have greater geographic diversity, to spread the early voting centers around the county more rather than putting them where the populations are of Montgomery County and the communities of Montgomery County. When we questioned them on a televised hearing, we called them in and I asked them in a televised hearing, the board, why they made that decision and who made that decision and who asked them to make that decision, who in the community had asked them to relocate that early voting center. The board chair admitted they had made that decision in a secret, illegal meeting with their state Republican staff and only the Republican members of the Board of Elections. They didn't ask David Naiman, they didn't ask Marianne Keefe, the other Democratic members. They're required to have an open meeting and have all their members invited. Instead, they had a secret, illegal meeting for just the Republican members and the Republican staff of the state party. And to this day, no one's been prosecuted for that, fined for that, or even removed from the Board of Elections. We still have some of the same members, including the same chair. Now, we eventually won our campaign to get the Burtonsville Early Voting Center reopened by embarrassing the county board and the media, pressuring the state board to direct them to reopen it. But still to that day, that's an injustice that we've had to fight back, and we still have the same members on the board. So with those examples of context, let's start with some background about election law in Maryland. Will's our representative in the Senate. Can you explain who makes the decisions? Where does our voter law come from?
Sure. Well, first, obviously, you have the federal law, and then you have state law, which the legislature makes. So the Senate and the House, and then the governor signs off on it. And then the State Board of Elections is responsible for promulgating regulations that will enforce those laws. The entity has been around since 1969. It comprised of 5 board members, right? So 3 of the majority party, or of the governor gets to appoint them. So 3 Republicans right now, 2 Democrats, and they work in concert with the local boards, with the county boards. So there are 24 jurisdictions in Maryland, 23 counties, and 1 city, Baltimore City, to go out and enforce those laws that come from basically top to bottom. Now, there is a lot of leeway, which you've seen here, especially in Montgomery County now under this administration, as to how the counties can interplay with the State Board of Elections. And so what you end up with under certain administrations is this kind of a patchwork where certain early voting sites can be moved around without the proper accountability, frankly. And that's why it's so important to have your state and local officials on top of these issues, because if not, this would happen, and you would show up on Election Day, and a number of voters, a number of whom would be members of ethnic minorities, immigrants, people who have recently come to this country and registered to vote, become citizens, are disenfranchised. And that's exactly what's happened here. And this is exactly why this type of forum is really important. And it's also important to make sure that we, I'm a Democrat, but it's important that, who gets into the governor's office, because they're responsible for those appointments. And it's a trickle-down effect. So what we're doing here in the legislation that working with Daniel Caroma and Tom on the council to ensure that White Oak has that, that we have the ability to put that site there, is really, really important, because obviously that type of guidance and that type of being attuned to the needs of our demographics and our voting population isn't happening right now. So that's why this is a critically important moment, and that's why I'm happy to announce that the Montgomery County delegation voted out our bill unanimously last Friday. Nice. Now that's good. That's a good first step. Now it goes to its committee of jurisdiction, which is the Ways and Means Committee in the House. So it'll get a hearing there, and we'll endeavor to get it out and get it across the street to the Senate so we can take quick action. But that's where we are in terms of the status of the legislation and why it's so important.
Thank you. So if you haven't communicated with your the Montgomery County delegates have now voted for it. Montgomery County senators will still have to vote for it, right, when it crosses over to the Senate, and certainly communicate with everybody about the importance of getting that early voting center in White Oak. This film is about voter suppression in Georgia. Joanne, what examples are you seeing about voter suppression elsewhere in Maryland?
Yeah, obviously, so first I want to say that luckily Maryland is not Georgia, right? And I say this because, we have a chapter in Georgia. I'm on the line all the time with our staff there, and, we're not experiencing things the same way that they are, right? We've advanced major reforms in the last few years. Senator Smith championed automatic voter registration for us and helped get that across the finish line, and that was fully implemented and live as of July 1st. Same-day registration, which I'm hoping you all voted on in 2018, voting yes on question 2, which also went into effect and was used at the municipal level. But when we're thinking about other ways that the vote is being suppressed throughout the state, I think right now, at least for Common Cause, a major priority for us, especially as we've passed these other reforms, and if outreach is being done correctly, the group of individuals who are really being left out right now are those who are currently incarcerated. So just by a show of hands, who here knows that returning felons have the right to vote? Okay, that's great. So we know that when voting rights were restored for the 40,000 individuals, I believe in 2014. And that number obviously has grown since then, right? Not enough was being done to ensure that they knew that they had the right to vote. Even though the Board of Elections had put that information online, even though local groups had been trying to lead the efforts on the ground. So we're seeing efforts this year in the General Assembly to ensure that they are being educated. But even more importantly, we're seeing efforts being led by formerly incarcerated individuals to ensure that those who are legally eligible to vote right now, who are behind the wall, who are currently incarcerated, that they have access to voting as well. So those would be people who are on pretrial, serving time for misdemeanors. Here in Montgomery County, I think is a great example where we've had the League of Women Voters of MoCo, right? Show of hands if there's anyone here, shout out to them, because for years, they've actually been going into correctional facilities and have been doing the voter registration and helping them getting their absentee votes out, right? And also providing them with nonpartisan nonpartisan voting information. So what we're hoping to establish is having something like that all throughout the state, because we know that they really, when we're looking at places like Carroll County, right, outside of the Baltimores and the Prince Georges, that these individuals are being left out. I think another example as well, and I could go on and on, right? But another example is, unfortunately, when we're looking right now at the process for filling legislative vacancies. And we've actually been hearing more and more from our members following the recent Baltimore City seat, I believe, the recent, I'm forgetting what district it was, right? But Senator Lamb and Delegate Moon has actually been championing this for years and has reached a compromise bill where we would be required to have special elections in coordination with already scheduled primary and general elections to ensure that voters' voices are being heard in that process. It really shouldn't come down to a handful of political operatives who are serving on a committee who are making the decisions for thousands of voters. And in this case, it came down to 3 votes that made the decision, one of which being the nominees, right? So it's unfair to the people who live in these jurisdictions. But those are just some of the examples. And obviously, we're looking at other ways. Even though we know that we've expanded access to the ballot, we know, just as you highlighted, that it's still difficult for people to get out to vote, even with all 8 days of early voting and election day because of their schedules. So hopefully slowly moving towards a voting by mail system that allows people to still go to the polls, but also make their voices heard via a mail-in process that would be different from absentee. I'm not sure if you want to. And sorry again, everyone.
I'll come back to that, sure. Laurie, did you jump in, please?
So in the city of Gaithersburg, actually even before the city of Gaithersburg, I recall Councilmember Hucker mentioning the 2015 issues with the polling locations. At that time, I was president of the African American Democratic Club. And so I know that it's still early in the conversation. We're going to talk about action items. And so when he called on the affiliate groups to come out and make noise about these issues, about people who wouldn't be able to vote, he called on the clubs to really take a stand, not only at the Board of Elections meetings, but send a letter to our state delegations, and on behalf of the club, we did that, and we also stood with him during that press conference they had in 2015. So to see this as an issue again coming up now, it's really disappointing. Last year, David Naiman came to testify before the city of Gaithersburg because Bower Park is one of the most popular polling locations, and we don't want to have anyone waiting in line for hours on end, or that being an issue to prevent people from voting. And so we're still in the process of trying to decide how we can better accommodate voters, and I think that's where the conversation should be. How can we best get voters to the poll and not put barriers in place to prevent certain populations from participating in decisions that are going to affect not just us, but the future of all of our communities? And so at the local level, we're doing a lot at the local level. If you've seen what happened even in Rockville, I think they've been the most progressive. Mm-hmm. They actually implemented a vote by mail for the first time ever. Their normal average turnout is about 6,000 voters. With vote by mail, they doubled the turnout. Over 12,000 voters came between early voting and election day. So you can see the difference of making it, easier for voters to get to the polls. This year, Tacoma Park is also, modernizing their voting system, and they've decided to have their elections coincide with the presidential election. So we're still waiting to see how that'll influence turnout. In the city of Gaithersburg, of almost 70,000 residents, we have 9% of our population making the decisions for all of our residents. And that's a normal occurrence, and it maybe goes above 9% if we have a really contested election. But we have almost a $70 million budget, so only 9% of the residents are deciding that. So in order to modernize our Board of Supervisors of Elections, we've started same-day voter registration. We're expanding our election information and making sure it's available in more than one language. We have about 4 different languages that we offer that information in. All of our campaign information about our candidates. We're also making sure that it's available in more than one location. Our city's voter guide is bilingual. Our ballots are bilingual in English and Spanish. Bilingual voting instructions at polling places, English, Spanish, French, and Chinese. Our election judges are bilingual. So if you haven't been an election judge or you haven't volunteered at the poll, you get paid to volunteer. So I encourage you to speak with David Naiman before you leave today. ADA compliance, that's another barrier to the polls. You know, we heard it in the video we just watched. If you don't have your handicap parking actually identified, people can get towed, or if there aren't enough spaces, set aside for, people who can't just walk to the polls, that's another barrier. If you're blocking or you have tables that are blocking, the ramps to get into the polling locations, if you don't have the voting boxes that are ADA compliant and you can't roll up to the ballot, it's just so many things, and we've tried to really make sure that those aren't happening in the city of Gaithersburg, and I think more and more people are trying to ensure access around the municipalities as well.
Great. Willie, do you want to jump in?
I'll jump in afterwards.
Okay. So each of you have had a lot of experience in fighting for voting rights and electoral reforms. What are any lessons that you saw in the film that we should be learning here in Maryland?
I would say vote early and vote often. You heard about people being poached from the voter rolls. People really don't participate in local elections. All elections are local. Our Board of Education members, our municipalities, if you live in a municipality, that's an extra layer of government protection that you should be ensuring you have a decision in how that's being done. And then start early. I try to vote early because I want them to see the early voting numbers, but then I also want to make sure that I'm available on election day to cover a poll, to drive someone to the poll, to staff a table for the Democratic Party, or to become a precinct chair so I can cover a poll in my community and people trust that I'm going to give them the best information. They know me, they see me at every election. And then I can also go to another state or another county and help out another area that could be, having these issues that we don't necessarily have as much in my area. So that would be my recommendation.
I would say, I think in the video they stressed the importance of if you filled out a voter registration form, go online, make sure it was received, right? Make sure if you've moved, make sure you update your voter registration. If you've requested an absentee ballot, double check to make sure it's actually been received, right? You want to stay on top of these things and that you're flagging any issues you have for groups like ours or the league or even the local boards as they arrive. I think another major component in Georgia was their robust election protection program. Now Common Cause and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law runs their EP program, and they do for the country overall. But unfortunately in Maryland, we don't run it for the state. What DC does is they call us if there's any issue. So for example, 2018, as polling locations were running out of ballots, we were getting phone calls and running over to encourage people to stay online. I think the state, even though nonpartisan orgs might not have capacity, the parties need to take a more active role in helping to create voter protection programs and ensuring that there are people outside of the polls, not only on election day, but during all 8 days of early voting. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, the EP program, because if there's not people that are there on the ground flagging these issues, or at least telling people to call 866-OUR-VOTE so we could get on top of it, all of the work that we've been doing really is to no avail.
It's for me, from the lawmaking perspective in the Assembly, it's just to remain ever vigilant, because if Montgomery County is an example of what we're going through, if it can happen here, it can certainly happen anywhere else. We have 24 jurisdictions from Washington County to St. Mary's. We got 47 senators, 141 delegates, and you always hear that Maryland is America in miniature. We have a very diverse population, about 6.5 million people live here, and so. Although we've made some tremendous progress with early voting, same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, restoring voting rights to ex-felons, and then doing it to folks that are still on parole and probation under supervision, but they've completed their sentence, there's still so much more that we can do, as you were saying. And for instance, for the vacancies for the legislature, that bill is sponsored by Senator Lamb and Delegate David Moon. Now, I went through that process, okay? So I've intimate familiarity with that process, and I'm committed to fast-tracking that legislation, when it comes to our committee. I mean, that's something that it's already been scheduled for a hearing, and as soon as we can, we're gonna move that bill along to make some progress there, to make it more of a democratic process for filling those legislative vacancies. So there's just, for me, it's just to remain ever vigilant and to continue to push for progress on some of those fronts.
Yep.
Yeah, vigilant is the right word. Laurie-Anne, it's funny you mentioned the importance of voting, but then being available on Election Day.
Yes.
Even just this week, Dave and I were at the council retreat where the full council had to approve our schedule for the year. And this is the first year, since we always have full council meetings on Tuesday. Every year I've been on the council, we have an election on Election Day. We're up in Rockville in a meeting. And every time I've spoken up and said, why are we doing this? I want to be at the polls talking to voters, watchdogging problems, fixing issues with long lines. And we've had, colleagues say, oh, well, we're busy. We got important stuff. So this will be the first year the council won't be meeting, I think, on Election Day, and we'll be out in the field. Do you all think voters in Maryland understand that we face these kind of challenges, or do people, are they unaware of this?
I think it's a mix of yes and no, right? I do think Marylanders, especially if you live, depending on what jurisdiction you live in, you may have experienced certain things. You know that it may be difficult, but I feel like a lot of times, Maryland gets labeled this very progressive state, right? Because we've passed all of these election reforms, people think that we're good and that we don't need to be doing more. And folks don't realize just how many bad bills go through the General Assembly every year. So just as much time as we spend trying to pass reforms, we're also trying to fight them off, right? You'd be surprised, and it's not just, again, we're not partisan, right? But it's not just Republicans, right? It's a both across the aisle. You'd be surprised, right? We saw a bill last year, aimed at cutting down the number of early voting days, right? There's already a bill that's dropped around voter ID. So there's always attempts, and while we know that we have champions in the General Assembly that will try to combat this, knowing that there are groups that are in Annapolis every single day, and even outside of session that are keeping track of all of these and making sure that we are preparing for elections that are coming, is important. But I don't think people really realize the attempts that are being made all the time, because we luckily are able to stop them. But yeah, it's not that great, y'all.
Right. We have a reputation as a progressive state, but I don't think we've touched on, do one of you want to explain how members of county and state board of elections are selected? Anybody?
Well, I know it has to do with whoever is in charge with the governor and whoever's in charge of the party. And so they have the majority of the board members, and they usually have greater influence in some of the decisions that are made. And so when we were the majority, the Democratic Party was the majority of the Board of Elections, I feel like things were moving in a more progressive direction. And now things have kind of stagnated, and so we do need more people to, as Senator Smith said, to be more vigilant in making sure that we show up at those Board of Election meetings and we write to our representatives, and not just the Board of Election members who represent our party, but to all of them. And we get our neighbors and our friends to sign on to those letters, and we let them know that we need certain locations here, we need certain policies put in place here. We need same-day voter registration. And I think it was Senator Smith who did the automatic voter registration bill that was denied. It didn't go through.
No,
or died.
We got it through.
Oh,
Yeah, so it went into effect in July of this year, which is, I mean, and just taking a step back, I mean, it does make sense because the governor has the opportunity to appoint the state board. You've got, like I said before, 5 members, 3 are Republicans, 2 are Democrats. They have 4-year terms, and so that's, I mean, it matters who's in the governor's mansion, and like I said, it permeates. I mean, it goes down and it affects our county level. The same thing with our county. I mean, our county, Montgomery County is majority Democrat, but we've got this imbalance with Democrats and Republicans now making choices on where the polling centers go and exactly how to promulgate new regulations to enforce the laws that we pass at the state and how they're interpreted to a certain extent. So it is really important, who's in that governor's mansion. Yeah. But for the automatic voter registration, that was working with Delegate Eric Lukey, who had that bill for several years before that on the House. I thought that was significant progress. But like to your point of the council, though, being available on the Tuesdays, we can do things like making Election Day a statewide holiday.
That'd be great. National holiday.
Mail-in ballots, things like that. And so, to your question before, I don't think we have this reputation of a very progressive state, and I don't think that enough voters realize, or and it's our job and our opportunity to make sure that we bring this issue to the top of people's minds, that there is a significant effort every year to suppress vote, and it's happening here in Montgomery County. I guess it's kind of the point of my opening statement, is that it's even here it happens. Right. Forget Washington County or St. Mary's County or Frederick County or Carroll County or Caroline. It's Montgomery County that we even have to be vigilant here. So that's why I'm thankful for you to do this.
Thankful for you. But that was my point I was trying to get at. I think it's not widely understood, and I often run into people who are shocked to find out that in Montgomery County, where we haven't elected a Republican in the last decade and a half or so, we have a majority Republican Board of Elections. It's not a group of nonpartisan experts like Joanne, and it's not even reflective of the majority party that the voters have decided should be in office. It's the minority party appointed by the governor. And even stranger than that, to be a big shot and be on the Board of Elections like David Naiman, you not only have to be appointed by the governor, you are nominated by the party's central committees. So it's not, a professor of election reform who happens to be a Republican who's nominated. It's the most hyper-partisan people that the Republican Central Committee put on a list and send to the governor, that then he appoints to the board, and they get to be the majority. Yep. So no matter how persuasive David and his colleagues are, they're always outvoted by the most hyper-partisan Republicans who make up the majority of the board, not just in Montgomery County, but in all 23 counties in Baltimore City, all across the state, by Maryland law, and that's really not understood. We appoint people in Montgomery County Council, we appoint people like, I don't know how many dozen advisory committees and other boards that are usually nominated by the county executive and appointed by us, confirmed by us, not the Board of Elections. That's just Larry Hogan, and it's his list of people who are nominated by the Republican Central Committee that dominates it. Very strange, right? Let's talk a little bit about the current fight for a new voting center. Pardon me? How can that get changed? Lawmakers in Annapolis would have to change that. So let's talk a little bit about the current fight for a new voting site in White Oak. We touched on it earlier, but Joanne, you and Common Cause have stood with the community every step of the way to advocate for the new site. Why is that new site so important to Common Cause?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Common Cause wants to ensure that anyone who was able to vote has access to voting, right? And that it's convenient and easy for you to do. I think even me, on a personal experience, because I grew up in a household similar to those that of the individuals who live in White Oak, right? Where my mom did the double shift every day, meaning she worked 16 hours. My dad was up at 5 a.m., and wasn't in the house until 11 o'clock. I understand just how difficult, even with all of those days, that it would be for them to be able to get to a poll, right? And how on a weekend, now that we have limited public transportation available, you know, how hard, again, on the one day that they might have off, right, to have to take this commute, stand in line for a long time, right? You know, it is a burden to the voter. And while obviously absentee voting is an option, someone who wants to physically go to a poll should be able to, and they shouldn't be faced with the long lines or this long commute at all. I'd say even more so because it's affecting a population of voters that are majority Black and brown, right? We want to ensure that they're able to vote, and I think Daniel's story kind of, you know, for me at least, is similar to the stories that we're hearing all the time, all throughout the state, from folks who just want it to not only be easier, but for the time to be extended, which just isn't always easy to do, and more. But again, I'm sorry, y'all, I'm kind of all over the place, but again, just remembering that we want to make sure that voting is easy, right? So if we're able to get this additional polling location, we're addressing a need in a population where it's very clear that this would make it more accessible for them, and it would cut down a significant amount of commute time that has been a large part of the problem.
Okay. And again, we're at this point taking this sort of extreme step of having to go to the trouble of passing legislation through both houses of the General Assembly to compel the State Board of Elections to put this early voting center in White Oak, because both the county board and the state board have denied the request of the county council, the county executive, and the county delegation to put the early voting site in White Oak. Will, as the sponsor, is there anything this group should be doing to help you advance that legislation?
Well, I'll just say that, you know, now that the Montgomery County delegation has voted unanimously to put it through, the House delegation, that is, now that it's in its committee of jurisdiction, that's where the action is going to be. So we have to go and lobby the chair and the members of that committee, because they're from all over the state.
Ways and Means.
It's Ways and Means in the House. And that's
Kaiser.
the chair is Ann Kaiser from Montgomery County. But it'll go to the subcommittee on election law, which is, I think, Delegate Nick Mosby from Baltimore City. He is the chair of that subcommittee. And so that's where the action is. So you've got to call, you've got to write, you've got to show up and say, this is one of the top priorities for us, and this is why. And we've got, you know, well-documented examples of the disenfranchisement that's gone on. And folks get on the stump and they talk about access to the franchise. This is exactly where you can make that impact, by voting yes and getting this piece of legislation out. And it is, like I said, it is shameful that we actually have to put in a piece of legislation for this. And it is reflective of the system that we have in place, Hank. So, you know, we can change this in terms of the appointment process for the members. And that's, again, why we have this imbalance. It results in policies like this. So I would say focus in on the Ways and Means Committee in the House, and particularly the subcommittee for election law. I don't remember the bill number.
Let me find
It did drop, though.
We can look it up. We're going to get questions in just a sec, Ed. Laurie-Anne, thanks for all the work you're doing at the local level to increase access to the ballot. You mentioned Rockville's experience with mail-in voting this year. Are there other things that members of the audience can be doing to expand ballot access in Maryland?
Definitely. I would encourage everyone to volunteer on Election Day and leading up to early voting. We have a few volunteers from the Central Committee, Board of Elections. If you aren't trained to register people to vote, I would get trained. If you belong to a faith community, make sure that there is a designated person at your faith community who you can go to, or you all can organize an event to ensure that everyone in your congregation is, you know, familiar with the voting process and isn't experiencing any barriers. Remind them that same-day voter registration's available. If you know friends with college students, make sure that they're checking their voter registration. We heard about college students in Georgia who had problems at the ballot. Anyone from the military in your family, make sure that everything is up to date, and don't wait until April to start checking on this information. It's online now, and if you see something, you say something. it's incumbent upon every one of us to look out for our neighbors who are going to the polls and making sure that they aren't experiencing any issues when they go to vote on election day. And early voting, you can vote anywhere in this county, so keep your eyes and ears open, and we have to be vigilant. This is one of the most important elections of our time. I think we've seen over the past 4 years how our vote matters and how it can really impact the fabric of our community. And so I'm just really glad that you took this time to do this important discussion this weekend. I think it's a huge reminder about the importance of these elections. Looks like we have a question.
Okay, we're right on time, 12:30, so we want to take some questions from you all. Yes, sir.
In Denmark, on voting day, you can go to any place in the country, not just your local voting place.
Wow.
Why can't we have that?
That's a great question. Senator?
Thanks. The answer is I don't know. I mean, it's logistically possible. I think fiscally improbable because it's just the cost. But I don't know why we couldn't do that. That's a fascinating idea. I don't. Yeah, I mean, if you could do it during early voting, right? That's right. Yeah, I don't know. That's within county at least.
And you can cast a provisional ballot.
And you can cast a provisional ballot.
Yeah, sorry. And I'd say there are
Fiscal
some
concerns.
election security
Issues,
concerns, obviously, that would probably require us to use a network. And while we do use a network during early voting, right, because you can go to any early voting location and register and vote there, we need to be able to get that data back in some timely manner, and we need to ensure that we have a way of making sure that you're not somehow going all around the state either and voting. So, yeah.
Rather than trying to reinvent the wheel,
See how they do.
hire a couple of Danish consultants.
Yeah, I mean,
Did it. I mean, this government was pretty good at one point
yeah.
at taking and borrowing other people's ideas.
I mean,
Why do a study on this so that they can get a couple of consultants and ask them?
yeah.
Sounds like a great idea.
Fair enough. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good question. Joanne, do you know?
I actually, so I don't want to give you incorrect information, so I'm honestly not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Ed?
That's okay.
We can't hear you.
Election observer involved in the problems of Fraser, and I want to thank you and Dave for your quick response. The real problem there was just the under-resources, and we need volunteers too, because I didn't get there till 9:30 to see the disaster that was unfolding. We waited, we had observers. But is there a standard that we can enact either at the state level or the county level that requires a greater quality of the resources? It seemed very intentional at Fraser that it was under-resourced, and I think we can address that in other ways than just the voting side.
I think that's a great suggestion. It would have to be done in state law, it would be my understanding. But it does seem odd to me that we have these sort of perennial arguments with the county board of elections about how many machines you need, how many staff you need for those machines, which types of machines, when it should be, like I always joke about, you have all 4 years to get ready for this. And there's certainly best practices from around the country we ought to be employing. But David, do you know, I've never seen any standard agreement on.
Apparently is a formula that is followed. I personally don't believe that the Fraser problem was caused by intentional action. But I do think that obviously things have to be intentionally fixing the problem. And I suggest to all of you, basically, after hearing from Tom, I came to the Fraser Center at about 2 o'clock on election day, and I left at about 10 o'clock after the last voter voted. And then I called the board president and got him to agree that we were going to have a discussion about wait times across the county. And we had that discussion in January of 2019. And if you go to our website and if you look very carefully, you representation that our staff made to us about wait times across the county and what caused them. There were a number of different causes. There were 12 precincts in which the wait time got to an hour. I think 4 of them were on the Route 29 corridor, including Fraser being the one that had the longest wait time. What I've been doing is constantly asking every month, what are we doing about this? We supported Tom's effort. Tom got us, I think, $125,000 in extra resources to address wait time. And then, of course, I'm pushing very hard, along with Tom and others, for their early voting site. I personally would like to see not only that I want the formula to be on the website. I want everyone to be able to see, how these things are done. I want us to have an ability to respond more quickly when we find out election day that our formula based on past experience doesn't necessarily predict what's going to happen. And then I want us to take every step possible to lighten the load on election day. Encourage people to vote by early voting. And by the way, if you don't want to wait in line for early voting, does anyone want to guess what is the busiest time to vote in early voting? Busiest hour of the 8 days to vote in early voting.
Rush hour.
The last hour.
Ah.
You don't want to guess what the second busiest hour is.
The hour before
Lunch.
Correct.
What was that?
The hour before the last hour. People just procrastinate.
Personally, I like us to have a message every day when we come today.
Yes. Don't delay. Come today, don't delay.
I'll just steal that. Come today, don't delay. Yeah. Let me write that.
She's gonna write it down.
Yep.
Yes. Just let me get my credit.
That's hilarious.
No, we'll quote you.
Absentee voting, make sure that everybody knows what all their options are. That may actually be easier than trying to figure out the perfect formula to have the right resources every day. And then encourage people to volunteer to election day. Because we not only need equipment, we need people. On election day for I think the staff brought myself, my colleague Alan Banoff, and I think 2 or 3 other people. So I think we added 4 or 5 people, and it still took, the voters arrived at 8 o'clock. The last voter who arrived left at 10. So we need not only the equipment, we need the people, and if we know people who want to serve as election judges on election day, as Laurie-Anne mentioned, that makes a big difference. I realize not everyone can do that, not everyone can take the day off, et cetera, but that makes a big difference.
Right. I was just reminded, we talked about standards for staffing and machines, but there is a standard, the Presidential Commission on Election Administration urges that nobody should have to stand in line anywhere in the country more than half an hour to vote. And here we have 12 polls in Montgomery County over an hour, and some like Praisner where people have stood.
That are above, at some point during the day, are above the half hour.
Unbelievable, yeah. And David, correctly, there are so many details I've forgotten. David reminded that we were able to put in a request for $125,000 additional dollars for the Board of Elections for more machines and poll workers this past election. And the staffer for the Montgomery County Board of Elections testified against it.
Let me just say, just to be fair to my colleagues, the board president
Was for it, yes.
both supported
The
right. Our election director,
bipartisan agreement,
board
but the staff member opposed it.
supported.
Yes. Bipartisan agreement from the appointees, but the staff opposed it. Hank.
I want to thank the panel for their expertise. I watched the film. It was a fabulous film. I got incredibly depressed and incredibly angry. The one thing that it left out is where all the beginnings of voter suppression come from. And in my view, that has a lot to do with money in politics. And I'm working with Get Money Out in Arlington to end the corrupting influence of big money on our elections. You can be sure that the voting machine manufacturers, that the elected officials, the Republican National Committee that supported Brian Kemp put millions and tens of millions of dollars into these efforts. And Tuesday is the 10th anniversary of the disastrous Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court. The astronomical amounts of money that are buying our elections, buying our politicians, not incumbents here. I'm sure. It is one place where the film hasn't led us. On Monday at 1 p.m. on the east side of the Capitol, there's a demonstration by a whole bunch of groups, American Promise, Wolfpack, others. I believe Common Cause has participated.
Unfortunately,
this is to demand that Congress write a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. Also on Monday at 6:30 p.m. in Annapolis, my organization, Get Money Out Maryland, and 27 other co-sponsoring organizations is having a rally to work on our state legislature to help them demand, to help Maryland demand a convention to propose an amendment to overturn Citizens United. I'd like to ask the panel about anything they see or are working on to help us get the big money under control that has taught the voter suppression.
That was a good preamble. You're probably a former elected official. Panelists? I'm kidding.
So I'm getting my voice, I'm losing my voice, so I won't go too much into this. Obviously, GMOM, we work with you all on the local level, and you know that we disagree when it comes to the strategy around calling for a convention here in the state, because we believe that it leaves a lot of our rights at risk, including our voting rights. But what we have been working on together is advancing public financing, right? Just as we've seen Montgomery County use its program for the first time, and it's performed really well. I don't have any of the stats in front of me. And this session, you'll see bills being sponsored by Senator Pinsky, cross-filed by Delegate Feldmark, as well as Delegate Mosby and Pinsky as well, for one for the General Assembly program and another for fixing the current gubernatorial system, so making it similar to what we have at the local level. So again, public financing really is what we're focusing on advancing here in the state and hopefully moving towards establishing one for all levels of office.
Okay, Tina. Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a question. I'm a little bit confused about the October deadline for real ID. Does that have anything to do with voting, or is that just so you can get on the flight?
Just for flying. Here in Maryland, no one should be asking for your ID. It's your first and last name, and that's it. If anyone's asking for your ID, the number to call.
866 our vote.
Call in, yes.
866 our vote. Sorry.
866.
I lost my voice.
If you register to vote online and you never provided
Oh yeah, you have to come with a bill or something.
your very first time voting, you may be asked for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and with other forms of identification, so a bill, a bank statement.
Okay, Harriet.
Thank you. This is very informative for me, and really makes me realize how much majority of my community is missing this information. And I'm trying to see what can community leaders do, especially on the grassroots level, to make sure that ethnic minorities and immigrant communities are all informed, and making sure this information gets passed along and people really take action. Because the majority of those communities are not even in this room.
That's a great
I'll
question.
let the panelists jump in, but we're certainly happy, I'm sure, to help circulate the film, show it again in different community forums, put together another panel or invite our panelists back, whatever, if you want to work with us to get the word out. Anybody else?
Well, I was going to suggest that. I mean, you can invite, any one of us, any of your elected officials or members of the Board of Elections to your committee meetings. If you have something in the community, not even at a committee meeting, you can do something at your house and, call it a GOTV party. We're getting into GOTV like now. And so now's the time to start having house parties and share this important information. Do, as our council member suggested, host an event. Let them see this movie and talk about how we can do better and how this won't happen in the city, in Montgomery County.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And just to follow up on that, I'll just add that Brave New Films, which had just launched this documentary, they have a goal of having 2,020 screenings of this film this year across the country. So anyone who is interested in a screening, we're happy to put you in touch. They have a discussion guide and other resources.
I'll just say one last thing. I've talked about this in my office, like that every time we have a community meeting on, various and sundry issues, the one piece that's always missing is how you can, the voting piece. So we always talk about the civic engagement, but then the most critical element of that, the baseline factor for entry, is voting, and we always neglect to kind of mention the updates on what's happening with voter rights, and how you can register to vote, or when the voting is actually happening. So maybe incorporating those, for us at least, every community engagement we have a little small piece at the end that says, hey, by the way, are you registered? Here's how you can do so. And so forth. So,
yeah, and I would say, at least even for us, we are looking to diversify our partners. I realize that sometimes we live in our voting rights bubble where we're working with the same groups all the time. So we want other local organizations working with us. So if you're here, you want to get involved, you want to be part of policy discussions, we want that. So I'll take your info.
Yeah, and Harriet, we'd love to show it in East County. Yes. If you want to work with us and get the African American Advisory Committee there, there's a lot of work to do. I think you make a great point. Lisa, I want to compliment you on the Will Smith lapel sticker.
Where's that?
And the Hucker sticker on your scooter there. Thank you, Lisa.
Killer right there.
Good taste. Good taste in stickers.
The Hucker's right there.
Yeah, yes.
It's a long time Hucker sticker.
They're wearing out. We'll get you new ones. Lisa, you have a question.
None of you have talked about the tabulation side of this. A couple of years back, when we first began using machine voting, we had a lot of problems with it, including problems. I think we're now have written materials.
Yeah, paper ballots.
Machines, so some of that's been addressed. But are we vulnerable to hacking or manipulating of our voter results in any way? This is a major problem with a lot of the companies that produce the voter machines. And I'm wondering if
Some of them are Russian.
You don't say
I'm
that.
wondering if this is something that's beyond your focus at this point, or whether this could be all for naught.
No, obviously for us, we are focused on election security. We have an expert at our national level, at our national office, who helps us as the state board is making decisions to change machines and so forth. I will say that the state board has us develop their own network that we use during all 8 days of early voting that has been tested. But again, anytime you're using a network, there's always risk of interference. So, but again, it's something that we're always actively trying to stay on top of. And even as they begin to take steps to renew their contract and are looking at other machines, that's where we'll be stepping in to help with that process.
And at the local level, I believe most municipalities have a board of supervisors of elections that interface with the state, the county, local election boards. And so what we do is we try to have a post-election debrief. And so we discuss the election results, we discuss the paper ballots that were received, even though we still use the electrical machines, and we make sure that the numbers match up. And that's something that I believe is done even with the County Board of Elections and at the state. I mean, as our representative from Common Cause mentioned, there's always an opportunity. You see what happened in Baltimore City where they were, held hostage for their data. It's something that we have to contend with in this, this new age of relying so heavily on technology. But I think with the paper ballots, you can always, reconcile at the end of the night and making sure those receipts match up with how many ballots you're actually turning in. And so that's why it's so important when you become an election judge, you're trained. There's a chief judge and deputy judge, and they are responsible at the end of the night making sure that those ties on that bag match the numbers of ballots in there and that no tampering has happened. I've volunteered as an election judge as an opener and as a closer, and you just see the lines and lines of people who line up to drop off those bags with the ties and those can't be broken and set by an official Board of Elections member. So I think there are different things that are put in place at the local level to ensure that tampering isn't an issue that we have to worry about. And I think if we get too caught up in the opportunity for tampering, we're going to lose sight of the real reason that we're all participating in this process that we trust and rely on so much. So
real quick, I know that the state had, and the State Board of Elections has in years past engaged the outside vendors to help with that security, with the network security. I am, your question started piquing my curiosity because I had this conversation a couple of years ago, and I don't have the details, so now I will get back to you on that because I'm curious again to see who we've actually contracted with for that network security.
No, we haven't contracted, apparently. They've just developed
They've developed the program, but there's an RFP, I know.
I don't know.
I've got to find out because I remember the discussions around that, especially for the last election, presidential election cycle. There was a big race to get, our network security and get some outside consultants to come in. And so I will get back to you on that because now I'm curious.
On the earlier question about the bill number for Will's bill to compel them to have an early voting center in White Oak is HB 137. Thank you, Joanne. If you forget, just write your legislators anyway. They'll know what you're talking about if you say White Oak. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Lynn has the answer.
Oh.
Ma'am.
Oh, he's been waiting
Yes.
forever.
You and then you. How about yes, ma'am.
Lynn, she has the answers.
Lynn,
Lynn Garland. She's all about election security.
This is a problem. Been a real leader in this, came out and objected for the leadership of the Montgomery County Council, and David Naiman has been a leader, and I've gotten bipartisan objection to the Maryland State Board. But I am very concerned that this could cause long lines in the 6 largest counties. And right now, the Maryland State Board of Elections is still proceeding to implement this process, though there is this objection. Now, I understand that Senator Kagan is going to be submitting a bill to address this, but I asked you guys what the community members who are involved here can do to help with this situation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I think once the security legislation is introduced, and right now it sounds like it's going to be where we're extending the ballot, the canvas that happens at the end, so moving it from Thursday to Friday, the deadline to Friday at noon. I think from there it's having the public obviously contact members of the General Assembly and urging them to support that bill as it comes out. Again, the bill hasn't dropped, so I don't know what the final version looks like, but we've been working with Kagan, we've been in touch with the State Board, and it sounds like something we'll be supporting, so if you all can help place pressure and help move that, I think that'd be helpful as well. I do not have the bill number yet.
Right. Yes, sir.
Councilman Hucker, the thing you said that kind of really shook me up and surprised me and didn't realize was that despite having 2/3 in both houses of the legislature, a Republican governing every board election is majority Republican. And it struck me, isn't that the root of all these problems? And should we make that the focus of our messaging is just change that one law so that we actually have representative or nonpartisan election boards that will respond to the needs of the community, not to a partisan incentive from somebody with a very strong partisan incentive to go the opposite way.
that would be interesting.
I don't know if it's the root of all our problems, but I'm in favor of changing that law. I think it's little understood. People are sort of shocked when they hear that. I've spoken to some leadership, and William may want to jump in, at the General Assembly, and some concern, and I don't want to go down the partisan road too much, but when you have a Democratic governor, most of these rural counties outside the big 5 or 6 are majority Republican, and then you're going to have are you going to have the exact same thing happening in reverse? One problem I have with the current system, I just think it's a great weakness, is they're not even confirmed by any kind of local board. We have Republican set-aside seats for WSSC's Board of Commissioners or the Park and Planning Commission, other things like that, and those folks have to go before us for confirmation as well. So there's a real incentive, and it's harder and harder to find, but there's an incentive to find, moderate, reasonable Republicans to sit on these because they're going to have to represent everyone. They're going to have to go through a confirmation process. But it's not so with the Board of Elections. So there's an incentive to pick the most, for the Republican Central Committee, just to choose the example, to choose the most partisan folks with no election experience whatsoever, and they get chosen by the governor, and there's no confirmation process. So I think there's lots of ways to improve the system, yes. Peter.
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying, it seems to me that, we're really not talking about this on a national level. This evening is clear from the film. But really, we're talking about the Republican Party, which is working overtime to suppress votes wherever they can throughout the country. And my question is, because we're talking about what you can do locally, but on a national level, what is being done or what can be done, how can we help out the national level?
Nationally, the Voting Rights Amendment. I mean, we still need to put pressure on our congressional representatives to make sure that it's passed and it reflects the ideals of the majority of America, and it doesn't look like what we just saw in this video. I mean, the exact match or that legislation, I didn't even know that was on the books. I mean, seeing this, that was the first time. And knowing how difficult some of our names are, my name is hyphenated, so I always have to remind people, my name is Laurie-Anne. It's not Laurie-Anne, it's not just one name. So I can't imagine showing up on election day and I can't vote because they forgot the hyphen on my driver's license versus what was actually written by me for the voter registration card. And so I think that's really the only way to do away with these laws at the state level and really implement something progressive and proactive at the national level. And it'll only happen with our congressional representatives. Luckily, we have representatives who are supportive. It's their colleagues that we have to worry about. And so just reminding them that we have their back when they need it. We'll come to the Hill and we'll testify if they need us. I think that's the kind of support they want to see from us on the ground here.
And we need to win the presidential election so we can get some changes at the Supreme Court. Yes, ma'am. Sarah.
I want to say something.
Fairfight 2020 that Stacey Abrams has led, and they have a national strategy, or at least a strategy for 17 battleground states. So if you're looking for a place to figure out where they think priorities are, then that would be a good place to get money to, and a good place to see their strategy, which is basically set up in each of those states for positions
Correct.
in the Democratic Party to make sure that voter suppression does not happen, because it's individual. Each state, each county is different in how it's going to look
Just
like.
that kind of
I wanted to not add to more problems, but there is a census coming, which also has
Get counted.
importance, not only to figuring out the redistricting, but also allocation of resources. And there is a similar effort by the Republicans to suppress turnout. So I'm just wondering if there's actions that you all see the synergy of this, or other things and other ways for people to get involved to make sure that census is as accurate and clear as possible.
I know on our end and with our partners in the league, especially as we've been talking about redistricting and preparations for Election Day, we've been we've been looping in census conversations into that as well. So we actually just had a census teletown hall, I want to say earlier last week with Delegate Wilkins and Senator Mary Washington. We also have a representative who serves on the statewide Maryland Complete Count Committee, and obviously we've been helping at the local level as well, with our focus being on Prince George's and Baltimore City especially. But I do think the state needs to be doing a whole lot more to help to get out the count. Just on that call alone, the few questions that they got, confusions as to whether or not people would be receiving paper forms, right? Where do I go for help? And there's a lot of older folks. Where do I go for help if I don't know how to use a computer? People who are still confused and who still think that there's a citizenship question on there, or even after letting them know that it's not, knowing that this fear of the government already existed prior to the census and that it's been made even worse. So I Unfortunately, we're very behind on the outreach that is needed for the census, and, the state is now working on finalizing their plan, and even the messaging hasn't been, there's just, if you really want to be helpful right now, in Montgomery County, it would be joining your local complete count committee. If there are any municipal complete count committees as well, those committees usually have subcommittees that are focused on counting those people without homes, that are focused on those who speak other languages and elsewhere, right? But we need everyone literally getting out and helping with that, because we know that because of the underfunding of the Census Bureau, there are less offices, there are less staffers that are on the ground, and when people see folks that they're more familiar with, they're more, you're their neighbors, they're more likely to at least be willing to engage with you. And if they're not, sending in someone who they are possibly more comfortable talking to. And I think this also means more of the local grassroots organizations taking an even bigger step and taking the lead on some of that, right? And reaching out to your CCCs, reaching out to statewide and requesting materials, because there's only so much that we're able to do at this point, unfortunately.
I just say that emphasis on the delegate Janelle Wilkins has done a fantastic job on all this. So I just want to give her a little shout out, but just an emphasis on immigrant communities and local organizations, partnering with them, because that's the barrier that you're going to see with interfacing with a government entity that's trying to come in and make sure that the citizenship question that is all very clear, because obviously it's a resource issue, not only for members, like for your elected officials, but for the amount of money that we're going to be able to bring back home to our local communities to facilitate and to deal with all the issues that happen with a growing population. For instance, California is going to lose maybe a congressional seat this year because of some census problems. So this is it's a real deal in terms of representation. And then to your earlier point about how you can affect it nationally, I think you have to then keep our eye on the ball that everything is local, because from redistricting, federally and for your legislatures, nationwide, Republicans have been focusing on that for the last decade. And then what has happened? Governors' mansions have flipped, state legislatures have flipped, and that's reflected in Congress. And even though the population is largely Democratic, so especially in some of these, Midwestern states, which is like Ohio, for instance. It's incredible how effective they've been in focusing on the state legislatures, which then again, permeates and it trickles up to how we elect and appoint our state boards of election and our local boards of election. So I just say, if you want to make a national impact, I think we need to refocus locally.
Yeah, and also just to piggyback off of that, remembering that the data from the census is not only going to be used for funding, but that we're going to be using that in redistricting, right? And that right now, Governor Hogan will be the one who is overseeing the redistricting process. So we're hoping that we're able to take some action this session, at least in establishing congressional standards, which doesn't touch, legislative districts at all, which we know is a whole other fight of its own. But again, right, it should be that the governor alone has something, not the governor, but who the individuals that he will be appointing have some standards that they're going by as they are working on, redrawing our lines for our congressional districts.
So the members of the Senate will sit down, and we're going to have to be armed with population being the number one thing of how to redistrict. So it's really important to have the accurate data and make sure everyone's counted now before we have that fight with the governor in a couple of years.
Nick.
And then April 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, each of our major campuses, we're holding Census Festival.
Awesome.
That's cool.
Bring the neighborhoods, bring the apartments, help get the word out. We'll be reaching out to all of you to help us get the word out. But we hope that Montgomery College will be one of those trusted, that could be a bridge between our communities, that rightly so, the damage has been done, it was intended to be done. So we're going to be trying to go straight into our students and our communities through that, so hopefully carry that message forward.
Awesome.
Excellent. Mark Hoffman.
Thank you. I'm the co-chair of voter protection for the Montgomery County Democrats. Co-chair of the Councilmember, many of you know her. I want to start by saying, as far as national volunteering, the Democratic National Committee has a hotline that they operate every primary nationally, and they're they've said that what we need is people doing things, volunteer with David or be an election judge, but also with the non-partisan people who are keeping the eye on the election, or the Democratic Party will have observers outside and inside of polls during election day. So just call up the Montgomery County Democratic Party office, leave your name, and we'll get back to you.
There's only a fraction of polls that are ever covered. So
Right.
There's only a fraction of polls that are ever covered. So if you're available.
That's right, thank you. Yeah, we will train you and authorize you to be inside poll observers. About threats, the movie talked about threats from last time. We don't know what threats are coming up. So my main information for you is to be empowered, and for your organizations to be empowered to report anything that's odd. Now, I will be in the Democratic Party office probably every time the voting polls are open, and somebody will be there, because we have to be ready for the threats that we don't know about. So look, even now, if there's something odd, like we talked about the polling books, live network, which is a great threat, and there are people working on that. If you see anything you think is odd, let us know, let everybody else know. The third thing, last thing I just want to say is, there's a balance between what we do within Montgomery County and outside Montgomery County. In order to affect the election nationally, we're going to have to work with Common Cause and with the Fair Vote people to affect elections in other places. So it's very important for all of us to volunteer nationally as well as
Yeah, and just to add to his point, I know that Common Cause is here, but I just want to stress that Common Cause does none of this work alone, right? All of this happens in coalitions. We have some of our partners who are here. There are a lot of citizens who are here who call us and are giving me updates all the time as well. So I just want to make sure that I'm shouting them out as well. It's a lot of groups that help to lead this work. Even when we're looking at same-day registration, that took over a decade to pass that one reform, and it's because of all of the organizations that made it a priority.
Oh, Councilmember, I just wanted to go back to the census question. So at the municipal level, I think that at the beginning of the census rollout last year, there was about $6 million allotted. Now, the applications for different jurisdictions to apply for that grant money at the state level, it felt like a covert operation, because the only announcement I saw was who received the money. And so by the time, I think maybe 2 months ago, the municipalities banded together, there was about $900,000 remaining across the state from maybe October to the rollout date. $900,000 to get the word out, to pay people. All of this is supposed to fund the efforts. The municipalities were able to get $300,000, and now municipalities have to apply for those grants. And then we still have to go through the process of making sure that it's approved by the governor to get that money to hard-to-count areas on the Eastern Shore, in little towns who don't even realize that the census is even coming up. And so if you're able to volunteer, and if you're familiar with any of the, I believe it's 6 to 9 of the different Office of Community Partnership partners, I believe everyone in this room can identify with at least one. They've been tasked with getting the word out, and that's through our Office of Community Partnerships Director, Diane Vu, and they are really good about getting information out to the community. If you want jobs, if you have students who need jobs, they pay up to $20 for these jobs. So if you're retired, you work part-time, you're looking for an opportunity, you don't have to just volunteer, you can actually get paid to help out with this effort.
Last.
you.
for paid temporary positions.
Yeah.
Great. And tell the folks you know who are looking for a job. Okay. I think we've exhausted our questions. We need to be out of this room. Please, Alice, real quick.
The Democrats knew a lot of what was going to take place before the election. And it just troubled me that there seemed to be still a lack of information.
I mean, I don't work in Georgia, so I don't want to speak specifically to what was done, but I do know that there was a lot of work happening behind the scenes very early on, and for months on end afterwards, and even now, preparing for the coming elections. So I don't think they did as much as they could to prevent all of what happened in 2018.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is what?
Why is no one in jail?
Yeah, like the current governor
Somebody has to prosecute
should
them.
be.
They don't go to jail by themselves. Okay, everyone. Please help me thank the panelists here. Help me thank Dave and Nick for putting all this together and everybody else who worked on it.